Now, both men and women, reproductive organs are essential because the world is populated by the use of these organs. When anything happens to them to block reproduction, it may affect humanity itself. Therefore, we need fast action in treating all reproductive diseases. Yet we know that historically, Black people are used for experimentation and receive poor health services, and also lack access to reproductive health care. Example is Black men in Alabama who were used for syphilis, and also Anarcha, who was used for experiments for fistula. Tonight is about honoring Anarcha, a young enslaved Black woman who suffered a sad reproduction condition called obstetric fistula. In the mid-1880s, Anarcha lived on the Westcourt plantation in Alabama and was purchased by a surgeon named Dr. James Marion Sims, who performed over 24 experimental operations on her in an attempt to find a treatment for fistula. And he did all this without anesthesia, which was in use at the time. So it's not like there was no anesthesia, but he just decided to do the experiment without that and maybe save money. Anarcha was not Sims' only test subject. We know of 13 other female slaves who were also forced to have these operations, 2 of whom were named Betsy and Lucy. Obstetric fistula has existed as a maternal health injury for thousands of years. However, at the time of Anarcha, there was still no visible treatment for obstetric fistula. Dr. Marion Sims was a young physician then from South Carolina. He started off his medical career as a general practitioner before transitioning into the field of gynecology. At the time, few doctors were interested in women's health issues. Sims therefore jumped at the opportunity to make a name for himself in the field of gynecology. He soon developed medical instruments such as the Sims vaginal speculum. Marion Sims has gone down in history as the father of modern gynecology. But we should really be calling Anarcha and all the other women experimented upon by Sims the mothers of modern gynecology. Their bodies were sacrificed. Sadly, there is still debate as to how to portray his controversial legacy. A lot of people want his statue to be removed, just like we have one going on in Halifax now. One thing that is clear, however, is that we must recognize how Sims achieved his fame as a surgeon for having developed a successful fistula repair technique. So he was able to develop a successful technique, but at the cost of the life of these Black women. Through the performances today, you will learn more about this devastating condition that, however old, continues to damage the lives of millions of women and girls, causing them to leak waste products such as urine and feces uncontrollably and to be treated like outcasts by those closest to them and by society at large. So welcome to Anarcha's legacy. Now I'm going to introduce the presenters for today. So I'm honored to I'm honored to introduce Habiba Kupadayaro. And Habiba is the founder of the Women's Health Organization International, which brings you tonight's event. In 2008, Habiba experienced a paradigm shift after learning about fistula and has been building awareness about the condition for the past 9 years. She holds a Bachelor's of Art degree, and in 2015, self-published her first book, Liens about fistula. Kila Rowe is a poet, strategic communication advisor, content marketer, and social entrepreneur. Outside her role as a poet, Kila harnessed the power of strategic communication and grassroots journalism to highlight impact-driven initiatives in Halifax. Kila recently launched a business called Communicare HFS, a media and public relations consultancy to promote and measure community news, creative services, and social innovation initiatives. Martha Mutale was to be one of our performers this evening. However, she was unable to make it. Afua Cooper, poet and historian, is considered one of the most influential and pioneering voices in the Canadian spoken word movement. In addition to her renown as a performance artist, Cooper is an internationally ranked historian. She recently completed her tenure as a James Robinson Johnson Chair in Black Studies at Dalhousie University. On February 1st, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recognized Afua Cooper as one of the women of African descent whose work has contributed to making Canada a better place for everyone. Now we have Kim Kane, who is a Dartmouth-based painter whose work has received local and national acclaim. She is an art teacher with the Halifax Regional School Board. Kim's current art exhibition, Embracing Afrofuturism, New African Nova Scotian Perspective explores questions such as, what if slavery never happened? This exhibit, which was launched just yesterday, will be ongoing at the North Branch Public Library until 21st of March. Kim is a featured guest of tonight's event. Now, will Kim now take to the stage? Kim is there already. So thank you all. This will be our presenters. And I call upon Habiba to talk about the Women's Health Organization International and Fistula and Anarcha's story. Thank you.
Hello, good evening everyone. Thank you all for coming. So tonight's event, I'm so happy WOI, my organization, can bring you tonight's event. WOI stands for the Women's Health Organization International. We're a Halifax-based nonprofit that was founded in 2012. And we raised awareness about this maternal health injury, obstetric fistula. So I'm going to tell you about fistula and how it connects to Anarcha's story, this young enslaved girl named Anarcha, who we're honoring tonight. Obstetric fistula has been recognized as a maternal health illness for about 3,500 years. It's a very old condition. From what we know, the earliest records date back to ancient Egypt. We know it was an issue for some women. in ancient Egypt. And there's actually an inscription in Thebes, Egypt, on a tomb. This inscription was found on a tomb, and it reads, "Prescription for a woman whose urine is in an irksome place. If the urine keeps coming and she distinguishes it, she will be like this forever." And today there are about 2 to 3 million women and girls in the world who suffer with fistula, in spite of how ancient of a condition it is and how easily eradicable it is. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with obstetric fistula, it is a childbirth driven condition that results from a prolonged and obstructed labor, essentially meaning that the labor occurs for too long. The woman is in labor for too long. This could mean 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. And the reason she's in labor for this long is simply due to access. She cannot access a C-section. And there are various barriers to access. It could be transportation, it could be poverty, it could be that even if she is able to get to a medical facility, a C-section is not available to her. There's no one who can perform a C-section. Now, as a result of this prolonged and blocked labor, the baby forces its way through her uterus, which causes a hole to form, and this hole is a fistula, a hole to form between her vagina and bladder, or between her vagina and rectum in some cases. So you have fistula cases in which there's a hole between the vagina and rectum and vagina and bladder, and that's what's called a double fistula. And that's one of the most severe forms of fistula, because this will mean that the woman becomes incontinent of both urine and feces, and she'll always be leaking these waste products. So it's a very sad condition, and it's a condition that causes women to isolate themselves. They become isolated because of how they're treated, because they're always leaking waste products and they smell. They hide themselves, they're treated as outcasts. And many women will not be treated for this condition in their lifetime. We know that of the millions of women who suffer from fistula, less than 1%, and this is something to take note of, less than 1% will be treated in their lifetime. And the reason for this is because the surgical capacity, the capacity to treat fistula, lags behind the cases, the development of new fistula cases. So essentially, there's this backlog because there aren't enough trained fistula surgeons. There aren't enough people who have the expertise who are able to treat them. And just to give you an idea of where it is, and to give you an idea of some statistics, most fistula cases are in Africa. And the rest of them are in Asia, Arab countries, and Latin America. Nigeria is the country that has the highest incidence of fistula. So currently, estimates say Nigeria, there are about 800,000 to 1 million fistula patients there. And one of the reasons that these women end up in obstructed labor, first and foremost, the most important reason to note is poverty. It's simply due to lack of access to maternal health services, a C-section, as I said. So it's poverty. What's very interesting is this story of Anarcha, this young enslaved girl who we're honoring tonight, who suffered from fistula because she was made to undergo 30 excruciatingly painful operations at the hands of Sims before he cured her fistula. And so what I find very telling about the history of Anarcha is that you still have young women and girls who suffer from it, even though in 1849, when Sims finally perfected the fistula repair technique, it was available for the world to use to treat these patients. And I just want to give you a brief history of Anarcha, Marion Sims, and how this encounter between them, this experimental encounter, came to pass. Anarcha was a slave girl. We know she was 17 years old. She was from the Westcott Plantation in Alabama. She was in birth for 3 days, so it was Now, during her third day of labor that Sims entered, he worked as a plantation doctor. So he'd work as a doctor on some of the slave plantations. And when he first saw her condition, he wasn't interested. He wasn't interested at all in dealing with her. And actually, when they first met, he used iron forceps to pull her baby out, to force her baby out of her. And in Anarcha's case, she had both vesicovaginal fistula and rectovaginal fistula, which means she had it in both the rectum and in the bladder. So she was incontinent of both urine and feces. So hers was a very difficult case to treat. But why did Sims change his mind? Why did he decide in the end to purchase her and to conduct all these experiments on her? We have to think of the personal gain that was in it for him. As our MC mentioned earlier, there were very few doctors who were interested in gynecology. Gynecology was actually just developing as a field in America in the time. So it was a great opportunity for Sims to make a name for himself, to gain some fame as a surgeon, if he could be successful in treating an obstetric fistula, something that surgeons decades and centuries before him had tried to treat, but were unsuccessful in doing. So Sims started a lot of these experiments in the early 1840s, between 1845 or 1846, one of those years, history tells us, to 1849. He purchased Anarcha, and there were 13 other slave girls who he also purchased. He has named 2 of them in his papers, Betsy, Lucy. Aside from Anarcha, he's named 2 of them, Betsy and Lucy. But what stands out about Anarcha's case is that he did 30 operations on her. And the scene, it's a very heart-wrenching one. There was the painting up earlier, the painting that depicted what it would have looked like in the operating room for them. It's a very heart-wrenching one because we see Anarcha sitting there on the operating table, and in this case she would have been lying there on the operating table, exposed, naked, with her legs open to him, and he would have been working on her with his equipment. And there were other doctors, other resident surgeons in the room observing these operations and watching Anarcha. In some cases, they aided Sims in pinning her down to the operating table. So, what's important to note here is that Anarcha's body was given up as a sacrifice, not out of her own volition, but because she was a slave, she was treated as an object, she was disposable. She didn't have a say in this. She didn't have any choice in this, and it was on the 30th attempt, I wanted to add, it was on the 30th attempt that Sims was successful in closing her obstetric fistula. So here we have now a fistula repair technique that is currently used today to treat obstetric fistula. And it's Marion Sims who achieved this. Now, he achieved it at the expense of Anarcha's body and the bodies of all the other slave girls he experimented upon. However, they're not given any credit. In this story, they're often left out. It's a story, it's a history that goes untold, that is unknown. So they're often left out of this history. However, they're catalysts. We need to recognize them as catalysts, as pioneers in this medical advancement of fistula repair surgery. And one thing I wanted to say about the location today, why we're here at the Maritime Museum, it's actually a perfect location for us because we're by the ocean, we're by the water. I know you can't see it because it's night, but I thought this location was very fitting for the event because Anarcha was a slave, so whether she herself or whether some of her ancestors made the transatlantic crossing, someone made it for her to have been on the Westcott plantation. So here she was as a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade. She was taken from Africa, or her ancestors were. She was suffering from fistula, and now today, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean from us, in countries like Sierra Leone or Liberia or Guinea, we have thousands of women who still suffer from this condition, which is completely treatable, which is easily eradicable. And soon we're going to hear some more about Black women being denied their dignity, being treated like outcasts, yet having their bodies exploited for medical gain. Stories of people like Sarah Bartman, who's often called Hottentot Venus, or stories of people like Henrietta Lacks, whose cells were used to develop the Gila line. So she had, if you're familiar with the story of Henrietta Lacks, she had cervical cancer. And when she died, tissue from her cervix was taken to develop this line of cancer cells. And what was so unique about her cells was that they could divide multiple times without dying. So this is Henrietta's story. Yet her family, her descendants, they did not gain from any of the experiments or any of the developments that were made at the expense of her body. So I'm going to show you some presentations. I'm going to show you some presentations that will help to underscore what Anarcha went through. But then now tying this back to the girls today who experience obstetric fistula, they'll also give you an idea of what they face on a day-to-day basis. And in many of their cases, they felt like Anarcha. They felt despair, they felt hopelessness simply due to the condition they had, and wondering whether or not they would be treated at some point. So there are a lot of commonalities between the two experiences, between the experience of this enslaved girl, Anarcha, and the women today who have obstetric fistula. So the first one I'm going to show you is a video. It's a testimony from a fistula patient in Mali, and she describes what it's like living with this condition. Okay, so we're going to stop this video here. I just want to play to give you an idea of what it's like to have fistula from a former fistula patient herself. And she made some good points, saying that her husband or her husband's brother felt that the family was wasting money on her. So that's important to note, because the fistula patients, their status as a person, as a woman, it's often a very low status. And then when they have fistula, it becomes even more difficult for them economically. They become more of a burden, so to speak, and they're seen as completely useless because they can't help themselves. They're always leaking urine and feces. And in their case, it's doubly sad because not only were they unable to produce a child, but then they also end up with this debilitating, with this damaging condition that causes them to always leak waste products. And often when we think about obstetric fistula and the consequences, we think of the incontinence, the urine, the feces, but there's so much more to it. There are other co-illnesses. There's one called foot drop, which means she always drags one of her feet as she walks. And foot drop is very common in fistula patients because as the baby is putting so much pressure on her uterus to come out, as it's forcing its way through her body, it causes nerve damage in her legs and feet. So she's leaking urine, she can't even walk properly, she might need to walk with a stick. So that's one of the co-illnesses. It can lead to infertility sometimes, so that can be a secondary issue associated with obstetric fistula, infertility. Some of the patients are very young, some of them are 10, some of them are 9, they're teenagers, they're children. So that's also important to note. But then at the same time, some of them are very old, some of them are elderly, they're in their 60s or in their 70s, and you might wonder why that's not around childbearing age. but it's because they've lived with the condition for decades. If they got it when they were in their 20s or their 30s, they might not have been able to access treatment for however long, and it's only in their old age that they somehow find treatment. And it's a life-changing treatment, and especially if it comes to them so much later in life. You can imagine how life-changing that is, but how difficult it can be too. And that's where the reintegration bit comes in, because they're used to living as outcasts, as pariahs, and then all of a sudden they can enter society once again. So reintegration of fistula patients is very crucial. Now, two more pieces I'm going to share with you. The second is another video on surgeon training, and this was mentioned in the video we just saw. The point that I said about the treatment capacity lagging behind the cases of obstetric fistula. And funding, awareness building is very important in addressing obstetric fistula, but perhaps the most important thing or piece of addressing the problem is having more skilled doctors who are able to treat the fistula patients. So that's just to give you an idea of the importance of surgeon training, and those two women, they're fistula surgeons themselves. And the fistula surgeons, they make an appeal, they're calling for more people to join them, and there are training programs in place to try and retain people in the field and encourage more to take up fistula training. Now the final piece is an audio piece by, it's an interview about Anarcha, and the experiments to which she was subjected. This interview is done by The Hidden Brain with Professor Vanessa Gamble. She's at George Washington University in the States, and she gives a very fantastic interview on what it would have been like for Anarcha to have all these operations done on her. Thank you. So I'm going to pass it back to Miss Egan, our MC for the night. Thank you.
Well, let's give Viva another big hand. That was wonderful. Thank you so much for educating us about this horrific disease called fistula. I've learned a lot about it, and it looks like even though it was in the 1800s that Anarcha had a problem, women are still having the same problem, and that is the sad part, that they found a cure. And these 3 or 14 women sacrificed their body to find a cure, and yet still we have people suffering this disease. In reading about it, I heard that in North America it's kind of eradicated, but in the poor countries this is still going on. And the sad part too is that they don't have trained doctors who can help with this kind of disease. So there is a backlog. And imagine what these women go through from all this film and then what we've been told. One, you are pregnant, you have the child, you lose the child. Then you lose your husband. You lose your own family. You are an outcast from society. So it's like you lose everything. And so let's put ourselves in the places of these people. These women who are poor and can't afford even to go to the hospital to be treated. Well, when you are rich and you have it, you can go to a doctor, pay for it at least. But if you are poor, you don't even have the money. So what can we do, really, to help this situation? because it's a very, very sad situation. And if you try to empathize and put yourself in the shoes of these women, it's very, very sad. And so I think we need to be thinking about it and also checking to see what we as individuals can do to help these poor people who go through this kind of fistula issues. So thank you very much, Habiba, for giving us a lot of education about this issue. Thank you. So I'll call onto the stage Afua Cooper to also give us some information about this issue.
Thank you, Felicia, and thank you everyone for coming out. I won't be talking too much about fistula. I'm going to be linking the travails, if you will, of women who have fistula with women here in Nova Scotia, historical women, and I'm going to speak about two women in particular, Lydia Jackson and Mary Postel. So, Mary Postel was an enslaved woman who was a black loyalist. She had fought for the British during the American Revolutionary War from 1776 to 1783. And after the war ended, the British gave papers of freedom to black loyalists to enslaved people who had fought for them. So after the war, as we know, thousands of them were transported to Nova Scotia. When Mary Postel came here, she had two daughters. Her enslaver from South Carolina, a man by the name of Jesse Gray, actually seized her in Shelburne and re-enslaved her, stole her freedom, and also stole her two daughters. Mary Postel had two daughters. And because her freedom certificate was destroyed, she had no proof to say that indeed in Charleston, South Carolina, she was issued a certificate of freedom by the British. She did take Jessie Gray to court in Shelburne. She lost the court case. The judge returned her to the enslaver and also her two daughters. And Jessie Gray actually sold one of the daughters down to the West Indies, and he kept the other one. And we believe that he also sold the other daughter back down to the American South. So all this to underscore the vulnerability of black women in this province. Even when you think you're free, your freedom could be taken away from you at any time, as the freedom was taken away from Anarcha and her cohort. Lydia Jackson was another black loyalist woman who suffered greatly when she was in the Shelburne, Birchtown area. In fact, she was very pregnant in 1791 when John Clarkson arrived in the province, and John Clarkson was this British abolitionist who had come to Nova Scotia to work with Thomas Peters, a black man, in organizing the exodus to Sierra Leone, which took place in January 1792, right from here, where we are sitting tonight. So Lydia Jackson was beaten by her owner, a man who tried to steal her freedom, and she was confined into a room and really, really abused. However, she was able to escape from that situation and join Thomas Peters and Clarkson and the other 1,100 people who left Nova Scotia and sailed for Sierra Leone in 1792. They were so badly treated in Nova Scotia that they decided to leave and go to West Africa. And so these are some of the travails that women of African heritage experienced during historical times to present time. We know that today in Nova Scotia, black women's health is still compromised. Habiba talked earlier about people not having access to proper health care, people not being given the right health care resources. So we think about fistula, something that happens in Africa in particular and Asia, but also we want to bring the lens to here where we live to see how Black women and their families are able to or not access health care. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Cooper, for trying to connect us to know that even here in Nova Scotia also people suffer similar problems like Anarcha, and there's a lot of injustice going on affecting women, especially Black women all over, also in Nova Scotia here. And that is why a lot of people left to go to Sierra Leone.
Okay, we are asking everyone to take their seats.
Kirsten Emmett, 1852. J. Marion Sims perfects a repair for vesicovaginal fistula. A procedure is perfected and quality of life is improved. The inventor is celebrated, but is the victory worth the price? While documenting a period when surgery was a crude art at best, this historically accurate piece challenges readers to see a side of advancement in medicine often ignored. Kirsten Emmett's poem raises the question of means and ends and underscores the vital importance of 3 words in the definition for altruism offered in this anthology: at all times. Kirsten Emmett is a general practitioner in British Columbia. This poem is from her collection of poetry, How Do You Feel? Another poem from her collection titled Unwed appears later in the anthology. And if there's anybody from Alabama, please, I ask your forgiveness for my butchery of your accent. We're slaves, the 3 of us, useless now to master since our troubles. He gave us to doctor to try to fix us. When I lay in labor so long, I cried to the midwife, save my baby, just one to keep. So many sold away from me. But baby, he died anyway, after being held fast inside so long. Doctor said his head wore through my passage into my water passage. Like a baby, I wear clouts. I stank. No man want me. Master say get out the house. Stay in the yard, the field. Anarcha and Lucy the same. Hurt having master's babies. The babies die, and they torn for life. Our cabin stank of piss. Our clouts hang to dry all over the place. Doctor cut us so many times. So was this way, so was that way. But the stitches don't take. 3 days later, the water and blood drip out together. We still torn. We still drip. Doctors cut Anarcha 13 times, and she still drip. Maybe all this cutting helps somebody someday. I don't know. I got no say. He gets 4 strong field hands to hold me down, kneeling. He don't say nothing to me. I hear him behind me. I hear the knives. Ain't no use to scream or fight. Shut up, gal! And a hand over the mouth. He puts those spoon things in me. Then he cuts me inside. I feel the blood running down my legs to the floor. Then he picks up the curved needles, and it goes on and on till I pass out.
The child is alive. And the niece of Granny Nanny, an Akan woman, a woman who can see far, a woman with the knowledge of herbs, a woman who works in the field cutting cane, a woman who speaks the language of her grandmothers, a woman who tells stories of talking trees and of fabled cities beneath mighty rivers, a woman who was stolen from her village when she was 14, a woman who was raped on the slave ship by sailors, a woman who flies to Africa when she sleeps.
We sleep side by side on the cabin floor. No sense wasting straw on us. We'd need new pallets every day. We'd be better off dead, I cry. Lucy say, no, pray to Jesus and we be healed. But what Jesus ever done for me? Anarcha say she cry every time doctors say to her, get ready, tomorrow. He got an idea to sew her up with silver wire. Say this time it worked for sure. Jesus, you a man. You never said a woman made for this. A field to be sewed with wire over and over until she bears. Ain't we done enough bearing, Jesus?
This woman, this niece of Granny Nanny, takes her cutlass and runs with the swiftness of Sagalom Kande in her guise as Buffalo Woman. This woman runs with her machete, an ancient chant rising from her throat, an ancient chant imploring God and all the women who attend women in childbirth to come to her aid. She says, form a circle around the dead woman. Breathe, give her breath, give her life, help her birth this child. And this woman, this niece of Granny Nanny, enters the circle, an ancient chant leaping from her lips, takes her machete and cuts open the belly of the dead woman and releases the child. Oh, praise to God, the child lives. Oh, Onyame, take the spirit of the mother. In the midst of her misery and pain, in the midst of humiliation and grief, in the midst of this inhumanity, oh, praises, 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 because the child is alive. Oh, Onyame, our world is turned upside down. Day becomes night, and night becomes day, and the dead is giving birth to the living. The woman takes the child, holds the child up to the sky, blessings. Oh, praises to God. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. The child is alive. Oh, Onyame, take the spirit of the mother. The woman dances with the child, east, west, north, south, dancing like the priestess she would have been, had not slavery stolen her away from her people. Oh, praises to our God. The child is alive. Oh, Onyame, take the spirit of the mother. Praises, 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 because the child is alive. Why? 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 The child is alive.
Jesus, you a man. You never said woman made for this. A field to be sewed with wire over and over until she bears. Ain't we done enough bearing, Jesus?
The child lives. End fistula now. End fistula now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Efua and Kila, for that wonderful performance. And I think ending fistula is very important. So how are we going to do it? So sitting here and thinking, what are you going to do to help to end fistula? And that's very important. There are organizations all around that we can donate to help with fistula. One of the things that we can do is also awareness to help people, because a lot of people don't know about it. So if we make people aware, that will help people to be able to know about the issue and also help in kind of ending the whole issue. Trying to spread the news everywhere that you go online, it will be very helpful, and also trying to donate. And they need doctors too, so if you want to be trained as a doctor, that will also be a good one. So I think we have a big job to do to kind of eradicate this fistula, because it's not a dignified disease, and it's a disease that can be eradicated, but it affects the poor. And I think we are all in this world together, so we have to help each other. Thank you. I think at this time, we've come to almost the end, and I would like to thank all the volunteers for a good job, the organizers, and also I'd like to thank the Maritime Museum for helping us to hold this function here. And also, I'd like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day, because today was a very nice day that you could have gone out to have fun, but you came here. So we thank you very much for coming to join us to celebrate this day and learn about fistula and some of the issues that is going on in relation to that. So thank you all very much for coming. And at this time, volunteers will go around to distribute some evaluation sheets. And I'll call the presenters to come on the stage. We've came to view the completed art piece and to take a group picture. So, before they do that, I think I want to clarify something.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that and to just clarify for everyone, obstetric fistula affects women and only women. It is an injury that's caused by childbirth. There are different kinds of fistula. Fistula, it's a medical term. It means hole. It simply means a hole. You can have a fistula in your throat. You can have a fistula anywhere in your body, really. Now, this obstetric fistula, just to be clear as you leave, it only affects women.
Okay, so after you finish, I think there are some books at the back of the room. It's called Liens about Fistula, which is written by Habiba. So if you'd like to buy one, there will be some on the tables at the back. And and it's just $20. So it tells you a lot about Fistula, the journey of a person going to Africa to learn about Fistula. So that's the book. It's a very nice book, and it's written in simple English with good illustrations, so it's easy to read. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Take care and drive slowly when you're going back home. So once you finish your evaluation, then we can look at some of the arts, and then that will be it for the day. Thanks, and God bless you all. Oh, a question? Okay. What's your question?
I had a couple questions. One was for Habiba, why she became so knowledgeable and interested in this particular condition. Beginning that, I think she was 17 when she became quite active, maybe even younger. 16 when she first became knowledgeable.
No, I was 12 when I first became knowledgeable about it, yeah. I read an article about a girl who had fistula in Niger. She was from Niger. I was so moved by her story because she was young. She was very young. She had the fistula. She was about 14 when she had it. Her delivery lasted 3 days, and then she gave birth to a stillborn boy. And even though her fistula was treated, she developed an infection 2 years later that she would have gotten prior, or while she was living with the fistula. She contracted this infection, and then it spread throughout her body. 2 years later, it killed her. And so in learning about that story and her experience with it, I was shocked, right? Because it was such a devastating story. And it was from that point onwards that I just started learning more about the condition, developing awareness, and then it's led us to where we are today. Thank you.
Can I ask another question? Just about, there was an image on the
Okay.
PowerPoint,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a woman that was in a museum. Can you say a little bit about her name and how she, I assume that was her actual quotes that they put on display in the museum?
Sarah Bartman? Is that? So she was a young woman taken from South Africa by her master, and then when she got to Europe, they paraded her around like a freak show, essentially, because they said her body was abnormal, that her hips, that her buttocks were so large. So that was her story, and then she met a very sad end because we know she died either from pneumonia or venereal disease. So hers was included as an example of another black woman whose body was exploited, right? But then in the end, who never gained from that kind of exploitation. Thank you, everyone. And one thing I'd like to note as we wrap up is that you can hand in your evaluations to the 2 volunteers who are at the back. There's Yolanda standing by one of the tables, and Bintu will be standing there with her. So you can pass them all of your evaluations. Thank you very much for attending, and if there are any further questions, I can take them back there because we do want to start wrapping up. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you everyone, and we thank the presenters also for a wonderful job. So let's give them a last applause. Okay. Sorry, we need to see the art, so please don't go yet. I hear the art is now finished, and we want to see how it's portrayed. So please don't go, let's watch the art.
And I just want a big round of applause for Felicia Egan. There are posters there. I'm giving a lecture on Monday at Dalhousie University at 7 p.m. Please take one of the posters. Please buy one of Habiba's books. She organized this by herself, and she's the driving force behind this. And I want to give her an applause, too. And Bintu is going to talk about an event she's hosting on Wednesday.